Hi guys, this is just a quick video on how to disassemble your Airsoft Hi-Capa, just in case you need to do any maintenance or cleaning on it. First, before you do anything, you need to make sure that the magazine is out of the gun. After that, pull the slide back so the end of the slide catch is level with the first small notch on the top slide. On the other side, you want to push the bolt out and take the catch all the way out. Once that's done, the slide will come completely off. Now, onto the top slide, first you need to remove the spring at the front. To do that, you need to push this guide plug out at the front until you can get a grip on it on the inside. Pull it as far back as you can and you will be able to remove that with the spring and the spring guide. You then have access to the guide plug, the spring guide, and this one actually comes with a metal and rubber washer attached onto it. That outer barrel can now be pushed through. If you need to split the outer and the inner barrel, these are just pulled apart and they can be a little bit stiff. This will now give you access to the inner barrel and the hop unit. The hop unit is held together by two little screws. Undo the screws and the unit comes apart in two pieces. Inside you're going to find the hop wheel and the hop arm attached to it. This can easily be pulled off along with the hop wheel. Be careful as there might be a little rubber o-ring underneath the wheel itself. Next, the barrel and the hop rubber can be lifted out. The fin on the inside of the hop rubber sits inside the slot on the hop unit, just here where it comes to reassembling it. If you need to remove the hop rubber, it can easily be pulled off at this point. Inside the rubber, you're going to find a guideline that's going to match up onto the barrel itself. This is going to help center it, and directly above it, you're also going to have the nub. This is what contacts the BBs and applies the backspin. To install the rubber, realign the guideline that's inside the bucking with the guideline that's on the outside of the inner barrel. Once you've done that, push the rubber all the way through until the rubber is seated inside that line and pushed up to the first cut that goes all the way around the inner barrel. Next, line up the fin with the window and the hop unit and make sure it sits flush. After that, install the hop wheel and the hop arm that sits inside the cutout of the wheel. So when that wheel turns, it's going to pull down on the arm. When that's all in place, attach the other half of the hop unit and screw it together. When you do, remember not to fully tighten one screw then the other. What you want to do is tighten them evenly at the same time. This way you're going to have equal pressure across the whole unit. When that's done, move the wheel and just check that that arm is going up and down. Going back to the slide, and the blowback unit on my one is held in by one screw at the back. Now, some Hi-Capas such as WEs and TMs will need to have the rear iron sight removed as well. To do that, you need to unscrew the large screw at the top and be careful as there is a small spring underneath this. When that screw is out, lift up, remove the spring, and there should be another screw underneath that goes into the blowback housing. Once all that's done, the housing can be lifted out. If you have a TM plastic slide, you may need to flex the sides and push out on the housing. Please be careful doing this as you can snap the slide if you're too forceful. Once the housing is out, you can separate it from the nozzle by pulling out and lifting up slightly at the end. If you need to get into your nozzle, it is all held together with this one tiny screw. Once that's removed, the internals will just fall out. To install them back, you need to put the spring in first with the valve and then the retainer, remembering to line up the hole on top with the screw hole on the nozzle. Once it's all lined up, put the screw back in and make sure it's nice and flush on the nozzle, but don't over tighten it. Next, to reassemble the blowback housing, you want to line up the nub at the end with the nozzle and the cutout on the housing. Gently place it back in and you might get a little click as it sits. Along the top of the cutout is where the spring goes. You want the coiled end of the nub to be on the nozzle. When that's done, you want to place it back into the top slide. This might take a few tries, just be patient. And when it is in, hold it down and test the nozzle does return. If it doesn't, then you may have knocked the spring out of place. Once you're happy, put that end screw back in and keep it all in one place. Once you've done all that, you can then push that barrel back through until it seats into the nozzle and then replace the spring guide with the spring and the plug pressed in to make it easy to install. Now, to separate the frame from the grip, the first thing you need to do is reset your hammer, easily done by pulling the trigger. After that, at the base of the grip is a little pin that needs to be pushed out. When that's out, you can remove the flared magwell and also the hammer spring housing. Be careful as this will still be under a little bit of tension. The beaver tail then can be lifted up and underneath is a 3-pronged leaf spring. Now, you can take this out. Be careful not to bend any of the prongs as they are set in certain ways. The hammer spring is held into the housing with just a little pin. If you need to break this down, just push down on the spring and take the tension off this pin. Then you can easily push it out, and when it's out, you can get access to the plunger and the spring itself. To reassemble, place the spring back in with the plunger and at the top push down slightly so you can put the pin back in. Back to the frame, and you need to remove this screw inside the frame and also the 2 screws found on each side of the pistol grip. When they're all removed, the frame should easily pull away from the lower. Now onto the lower pistol grip, and there are 2 pieces you can remove from this, the mag catch and the trigger. To remove the mag catch, you'll find a small flathead screw. Push down as far as you can and turn 90 degrees anti-clockwise for it to lock into place. After that, you can just push the catch all the way out. Here you can see how the locking mechanism looks and how it actually works outside of the pistol grip. Finally, you have the trigger, and with the mag catch removed, this can easily be pulled out. If you need to change the trigger for whatever reason, it's all held in by this one tiny pin. To reinstall the trigger, just place it back into the grip. It does sit along some grooves and it can only go in one way. Next, the mag catch can be dropped back in and locks back into place by rotating that screw 90 degrees clockwise. And when you do that, just allow the spring tension to come up all the way until it's flush with the housing. Now onto the frame, and normally this is thought as the hardest part. First, you want to flip up the safety, and on mine, I can then take the right one off. Flip it over and remove the other side of the safety, but be careful, there is actually a pin that rests on this one, and if you're not careful, this thing can go flying across the room. With the safety out, pull that pin out, and you can also remove the beaver tail as well. At this point, I normally like to take out the spring and the smaller pin that's in the housing so they don't go missing later on. After that, you'll need to remove this screw, and when you've done that, top part will come straight off. In here, you're going to find your hammer and your hammer strut. Next is your sear and your disconnector. To reinstall it, first you want to put the disconnector back in with the little U shape revealing the hole in the frame. Next, the shaft of the sear sits in that hole over the top of the disconnector. And when you've done that, you can then put the hammer back onto its post. Looking at the top piece you took off earlier, if you flip it over, you can see the knocker valve system. This is what hits the gas valve on your magazines, releasing all the gas and making it work. To strip it down, you will need to lift the knocker over the spring connected to it, allowing you to pull it out. When that's out, you can now lift the spring. Next, the housing behind it is held in by one screw. Remove the screw and be careful lifting it up, as there is a spring attached to a metal lever behind it. To reassemble, place the spring back into the housing, and the metal lever has a recess that sits on top of the spring. With that all in place, you can then place the top cover back on and screw it back together. Push down on the lever just to make sure it's returning. Next, you want to replace the knocker back into its track, and with the hooked end of the spring, attach it onto the cutout at the back. After that, you can put the spring back onto its post. The other end of the spring will need to sit on the other side of this metal bar that's going to put tension onto the knocker. When it's all assembled, it should look something like this. Now you can reassemble the frame. Take your time and line everything up before putting that screw back in place and securing it. Next, replace the 2 pins and spring. They need to go in this order, with the small spring going towards the slide catch and the large spring hitting the safety catch. After that, you can now replace the safety levers. Place the right one in first with it levered up. It's easier to do it with a hammered pull down as well. After that, you can then place the other side of the safety catch. Just remember that little pin, and you'll need to push that in before the safety catch can go all the way and lock in. This can take a bit of playing around, so just take your time. Once that's done, you can then insert the frame back into the lower grip. When you do this, remember the trigger bar needs to sit behind the sear and the disconnector. When it's all in line, replace the 2 grip screws and that 1 screw inside the frame. Once that's all done, you need to manipulate the hammer back up. After that, you can then lever up the beaver tail and insert the leaf spring back in. There is a little lip on the leaf spring that sits inside a cutout on the back of the pistol grip. You'll also need to make sure that the muzzle and the far right arm are sitting on the sear and the disconnector as shown here. And the hammer strut is also resting on top of the leaf spring in between the cutout on the beaver toe. When that's all in place, you can then insert your hammer spring housing back in. This will slide over the top, and you will need that hammer strut to rest on the plunger before installing the flared magwell and pushing that pin back through to secure it all. When that's all done, the only thing left to do is reinstall the slide. Just like taking it off, slide it back onto the track and line up that small notch so you can easily insert that slide catch again. Now with the mag out, cock the slide and pull the trigger. Keep your finger on the trigger and then cock it again. If the hammer stays back, you've done it right. If for whatever reason the hammer flips back up with the slide, you might have a problem and need to reposition the leaf spring. Should be an easy fix, just take your time on it. I hope this video helps, and if you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments below.